Before I roast the critics, here is this week's mystery review. I will read a review and you have to guess what movie it is in reference to. Put your answers down below. The review is, in an era of look at me CGI fireworks, here's a movie with a let's work together emphasis on problem solving and teamwork. Take a stab at what movie you think this is referencing. I will give the answer later in the video. Let's roast the critics who hated 28 Days Later. First up, we have Alexander Walker from London Evening Standard. It says, there is not an earthly glimmer of an original idea in the whole film. Tell me, what would make this film original enough for your liking, Alexander Walker? Perhaps The Infected should have had a song and dance number to put on your Sunday clothes? Or were you just upset that the zombies chewed up too much screen time? Meanwhile, in Reality Land, 28 Days Later gave us scenes of an empty London that are so eerily haunting that it makes The Walking Dead look like a Norman Rockwell painting. I feel like The Infected were so monstrous and swift that I actually worried about the protagonist. And that's a very rare thing to feel when you're watching any movie nowadays. But no, let's just go along with Alexander and just call it a day. Say, you know what? This movie isn't original. There have been zombie movies done before. Like, did you not watch Ant-Man because you've already seen A Bug's Life? Is that where we're at here? Frank Sweetek from One Guy's Opinion says, it is relentlessly grim and gruesome. It does what it sets out to do. The problem is that apparently what it wants isn't so much to give us a pleasant scare as to disgust us. How does Frank keep finding himself in these movies that clearly weren't meant for him? He buys a ticket to an R-rated post-apocalyptic zombie movie, and all he could do is complain that it went over and beyond the scares and actually evoked other emotions out of us? Like, come on. Like, haven't you been around zombies, Frank? It's not like walking through a bed of tulips. In short, they are not pleasant. Frank, I take you as a guy who sits in his big armchair in front of the fireplace with a velvety red robe and an ascot and a corncob pipe. Frank, I've called you out in other reviews. We've talked about this. Stop going to these movies. I honestly don't think that anything made past 1972 was meant for you, Frank. Scott Von Doviak from Fort Worth Star Telegram/DFW.com says that 28 Days Later is a grim slog through mud, rain, and poorly lit corridors. Poorly lit corridors. He hasn't seen the sequel yet, has he? But yeah, if this movie wasn't grim and poorly lit, it would be a joke to the horror genre. What's he want to see? Squirrels and birds dancing and mating around the screen? Like singing songs about cleaning up their nests? Let's get the sun out. Let's get all the sun shining on all the dancing animals. Snow White, man. Just go watch the Snow White remake. Actually, the lighting was worse in that movie. And honestly, those dwarves may have been freakier than The Infected. But again, in a real-life zombie situation, you're probably going to lose your bearings, and you're not going to care how light it is. And you're probably going to feel a little bit grim when you watch your wife and children get ripped apart limb by limb in front of your face. You're not going to like that day, man. When that day comes, that will probably be up there in one of the top worst days of your life. So expect to feel a little bit grim, just like this movie. Jack Garner from Rochester Democrat and Chronicle says, the operatic gore eventually goes over the top. Once again, in a real-life zombie situation, it's not all firecrackers and rainbows. You are bound to see blood shooting out of people's eye sockets like geysers. The ground you stand on will splash with the blood of innocent victims who are now infected. Therefore, in a real zombie invasion, it's gonna be over the top. David N. Butterworth from La Movie Beowulf says, the scariest thing about Danny Boyle's film is the surprisingly large percentage of people seemingly infected by its cheap and shoddy plagiarism. Okay, let's just call Kevin Feige over and have him polish everything up. Make the zombies look a little bit more presentable for the screen. Okay, let's get all the green screens. All right, and then we're gonna get all the special effects and the digital artist. It's gonna be great. We're gonna make everything look so sparkly and glittery, and it's gonna look so polished. I'm glad this movie was cheap to make. $8 million. That's it. That's like a drop in the bucket. And it turned out to be as good as this? Like, honestly, are we seeing a trend here? I mean, even today, all these years later, we are seeing the cheap movies get more praise than any high-budget extravaganza that's coming out these days. In fact, that should be the cap for all movies going forward. 8 million. 8 million tops. If you can't figure out how to make a practical effect If you can't figure out how to glue toothpicks together like George Lucas did and, do all these great things, then don't be a movie maker. If you're just gonna constantly rely on post edits to fix everything up and make it look so dazzling, then get out. Like, we don't need the digital effects anymore. We want practical animatronics. Bring those fucking back. Anthony Lane from The New Yorker says, the picture is twitchy and annoying, flecked with blood and half-digested ideas, and too much is left unexplained. Oh no, a movie doesn't actually tie a pretty bow on every plot point. I'm sorry, Anthony, that the director, Danny Boyle, didn't put a cherry on top of the production and resolve everything with a nice and tidy happy ending. Let's go ahead and bring Andy Griffith onto the set, and woo, it's gonna be so cute and nice and friendly. Like, if that's what you're looking for, go watch a Ron Howard movie. Like, honestly, if you're gonna weigh in as an alleged critic, then keep away from our movies. Alright, let's head on over to the audience reviews. No Name gives 28 Days Later half a star and says, there is no way this movie's rating is this high. It has to be one of the most poorly written movies ever. No offense to the writers of 28 Days Later, but what is there to write? If you're a writer and a producer asks you to write a script for a zombie movie, you write 2 words. Run away. That's the script. The director will take care of the rest. Take your payday and be on your way. Darren M. gives 28 Days Later 1 star and says, I stopped after the first 10 minutes. Sorry, this can't be a good film. And many reviewers agree. Okay, if you can't get past the first 10 minutes, then you are not qualified to write a review for this film. Can we all agree with that? It barely got started, and you claim that you're justified in giving it a bad score on Rotten Tomatoes. Look, I walked out of Disney's Brother Bear. I might not even made it 10 minutes in, but I have never gone around saying that Disney's Brother Bear sucks. Like when that movie is brought up on the construction site. Yeah, you'd be surprised how much people talk about that movie still. I have never said to them, oh, I hate that movie, it sucks so bad. Because I'm not an authority, I have not seen the movie. However, I did make it past the halfway mark on Avatar. So yeah, I feel like I'm justified to talk trash about that movie. Especially since I'm so pissed off at James Cameron for wasting his talent on these giant Smurf movies. Like, getting 10 minutes into the movie is like watching the trailer 3 times. No Name gives 28 Days Later 3 stars and said, a pretty good movie for 2002. One issue I found is that there are a lot of fast-moving camera shots, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on. It's called dropping you in the war zone, throwing you into the fire, putting you into the middle of the action. That is actually a technique that good directors use. We have 2 most honest reviews. But before I get to that, let me reveal the answer to the mystery review I read earlier. I hope you put your answer down below. If you'll remember, the review was, in an era of look at me CGI fireworks, here's a movie with a let's work together emphasis on problem solving and teamwork. That review came from Mark Kaiser from Synagogues, and that is about the movie The Martian from 2015. The first one comes from Matthew Turner from View London. He says, 28 Days Later is impressive, atmospheric, and very scary. And then we have Danny Minton. He's from KBTV NBC, Beaumont, Texas. He says, I don't get scared very easily, but this movie almost made me wet my pants. I didn't almost wet my pants, but I don't really get scared. It's a very creepy film. I looked away a couple of times, which is crazy. I never look away. Thanks for hanging out. If you want to know when the next video comes out, subscribe and ring that bell. Otherwise, I will see you next time.